Recording in progress.
Okay. So in this class, we are going to talk about sampling methods, and then we will cover surveys a little bit and see if we can finish up analytics part. Yeah, so it's going to be a lot of material we'll be discussing, and I don't want to go too fast on these. So we will go, bits at a slower pace so that in between you can ask questions if you'd like. Now, we spoke a little bit about what the probability sampling and non-probability sampling means. But at the same time, to start with, why do we do the sampling in research? I guess one of the important aspects of picking the sample size is obviously because the population size is too large, and we need to extract from that a sample that is representing that population. Representing means that you are creating a test environment which is more in your control, and at the same time you are extracting the kind of data or selecting the subject of your search or research to have somewhat common traits or a balance in terms of staying non-biased by making a case that it was randomly picked without your personal choice so having an impact in that selection. Then there are traits and attributes and characteristics and trends that have to have sort of a commonality so that you again can call it a representative of the population. Therefore, a sampling method is important not only for running it in your test environments, but at the same time, you want to make sure that methods or methodology is followed in bringing those samples out for you to work on. And that methodology means that it is to be accepted industry-wise as something that others can recognize or relate to as having kind of a method which is typically used in that particular situation. So we do have to know a little bit of the type and methods of extracting those samples, and at the same time understand that there could be situations where the sampling will not work. I guess inherently would have a limitations if you use it or you bring them in a random way. So you have to actually proactively do that selection. Mostly that type of selection would require a recruitment of sorts, which is what we call sample recruitment. And that process in itself would have the element of bias, where it's not bias free, but at the same time, it is also considered a method which is non-probabilistic method. And these two things we will discuss, probability and non-probability. So let's see what the book tells us about data sampling methods in terms of probability sampling versus non-probability. We'll start with probability sampling. There is 4 types we will be discussing. One is simple random sampling, which really don't require a lot of explanation. It's just randomizing something, numbers, individual names, or could be anything from which you are extracting that sample as having a pool of individualized, uh, um, you know, names or numbers or anything that is randomly placed in a bucket from which you're going to select one or two depending on your sample size, as if it is randomly selected, but it is simple to select from. And if there was like 100 of these in a bucket as pieces of paper without revealing what's in it, and you're just going to select one out of the 100 of those numbers, that one number would be the sample size. That's simple random sampling. Not much in there. Now, there could be situations where you will need stratified sampling methods. Stratification is that when you are building something as a sample by breaking them down into stratas that may have a homogeneity or have a typical characteristics, which needs to be separated, um, as if each of these are grouped individually, and there could be several groups. I'm calling stratas as groups, but groups is the same thing as strata. Strata is basically representing a class A sample or class B sample or class C sample. So there could be these three stratas that you can create. Okay, and then you randomize out of those different stratas. Systematic strata is when you have even more complex situation where a system requires for you to identify a certain method of selecting those stratas, but they go from one strata to another, as if one sample is getting filtered into the second sample, the second is getting filtered into the third. So there is a system to it. Then there is a cluster sampling, which is where you are basically looking at a large volume of data, but because of the physical limitations to how far you can go and collect them, if you have to do it manually, you would select a region or an area or a wider scope of sources that would be called clusters, except that the cluster has a limitation. There's always demarcations for selecting any kind of sample, obviously. So the cluster is a larger set, as if there are these buildings, or if it's a manufacturer, then they may have factories in different areas, could mm, be somewhere, in one state versus another state versus another. But since these states are close to each other, you have created a cluster. But the cluster basically is looking at what's in those area as a selection. Could be a building, one of the factories, and so on. But we have this actually arranged in the slides, which is showing you how it is practically applied. So I'm going to start with showing you the first slide for stratified sample. We don't have one for simple random, but you get the idea of what simple random is. So stratified is what we are going to look for. And later on, when we'll be doing quantitative analysis, we are looking at statistical methods as one of the chosen method of doing analytics on quantified data or quantitative data. In that, you will find that we are talking about things like mean, median, mode, uh, which is like mean is like same as average, and it is something that we are all familiar with. If you look at how it is illustrated, you can connect it with what you have learned in your school days in statistics. So, what is the question usually from the students on learning statistical method is, why do we need that? Uh, Before, we used to start with those analytics methodologies first before we got to the sampling side. So there was obviously a question and a disconnect of what, why, and why we are learning that. And sampling method right now is what is going to tell you why we would actually need those statistical methods, since we are starting first with the sampling. So at times I might use terms which are, you know, terms like mean or average or median and things like that. But don't worry, we'll be covering that as well. However, I think sampling method would give you an idea of why we use those statistical methods. Uh, Stratified sampling for starters. What It's best explained if I can just show you this diagram over here. And it is showing that supposing we have a population here of 1,000 employees, far too many for us to do any tests or obtain any uh, information. Physically, it may be more strenuous for us. So we have to extract a sample. But the method that we'll follow is, let's suppose the criteria of selection would be male and female, like how many female workers are there and how many male workers are there. So from the main population of 1,000, we know 800, for instance, are females and 200 are male employees. And if we look at what stratified sampling is, strata means that we are now going to divide them or somehow be able to reduce the sample of 1,000 into a smaller status or groups. For females, for instance, we have to separate under based on a rationale that basically 80 to 800 to 200 is 8 is to 2 in ratio, as well as 80% to 20% if we look at the percentages. So what we did is we took in one strata 80 females, and in the other one we took 20 males. Okay. So we maintained a ratio, but technically we were able to extract a total sample of 100 employees, maintaining a certain ratio so that when you taper it down or you reduce it, it maintains its integrity of ratio. So nobody is going to question if more females were selected or less males were selected. So there is a rationale. Now, in these two stratas or groups, we are still not, um, we have to still randomize it in order for us to make the final selection. But the basis of selection is selected with 80 females and 20 males. When we combine them together, out of 100, we are going to randomize and pick and choose employees out of the sample of 100, for instance. So let's suppose we had a sample of 100 employees, and if we have to choose any one of these from this group of 100 employees, it will be called randomized sampling. So we did not randomize it in the first stage, we created status. In the second stage, once we got the sample, we could safely randomize and call it a selection from a sample which is representative of the main population over here. Criteria being male and female. So these are the status, very simple to understand. Systematic sample is more tricky when you have a mix of attributes and characteristics in a population that requires some sort of a system that would reduce or bring that population um, or represent that population out of extracting certain randomized selection, which may not be just one stage, but it would require a second stage or a third stage, which means that you keep reducing it and filtering it down to the size exactly that you need, maintaining the integrity. But when you're randomizing it, or at the time when you actually are making that selection, which is out of the out of the sample that you came up with, at that time you would want to create a sort of a rationale for selecting those out of those stratas by say employee numbers, or we are assuming employees right now for illustrations, and it's all individuals. Samples does not have to be individuals, or doesn't have to be human beings. It could be other things also. You know, could be product, it could be machines, it could be non-human objects also. But we are right now, for explaining, we're talking about individuals, humans, human beings. So assuming that we want to extract sample of employees, in the green, we have a number of employees selected. Let's say the population has 10,000 employees. From there, we are just doing randomizing, basically selecting without any, because there could be one class of people, or it could be, line workers which are in manufacturing, for instance. So only those employees would be selected and placed in this green circle area right here. Now, from this, we need to come up with the arrangement of how we are going to make the selection by using either mean, average, mode. Average we can't do with human beings, obviously. So there is another way which we call median. Median is, as if you are creating a list of employees, and they are numbered, or they could be alphabetically arranged, or they could be arranged according to the employee numbers, whatever it may be. But that list is organized in that sense. Now, once that is organized, you would select the best method, which in my opinion would be median. Median means that out of that list, which is already organized list, you're going to pick the sixth employee or the 10th employee, which is going to make it a non-biased selection. Um, and at the same time, it has a method to it, or it is recognized as a method as a statistical method we call median. So what we did from this set is that we made and organized a list of employees in this circle in purple color. And from here, we selected, let's say in this, if we read this example, it says all employees of the company are listed in alphabetical order from the first 10 number you randomly select, starting point number 6. You start from number 6, and then you keep moving from there on, and look at the 10th employee, and then another 10 employee. So basically it will look like 6, 16, 26, 36. This could be, this is just simply listing them as 1, 2, 3, 4, not to make it too complicated. So we were able to select every 10th employee, and this one in the orange color is showing one highlighted yellow colored person as the 10th employee. So this is what the selection would be. And let's suppose you need 100 people. So, every 10th person you can keep adding until you got a total size of 100 employees. And this is where the end result, or where the sample is actually showing in this red color circle. All of these are systematically selected, or they have a systematic method applied to it. Nothing complicated, but it does get extremely complicated when the sample demands that you not only reduce it, but you are also looking at attributes which can further be split into, after selecting this sample, into characteristics, or into something that you would do as a selection, let's say after giving a survey to these 100 employees, and based on the result of those surveys, sometimes you want to separate them according to what result was bought after the survey, or the conclusion of the survey, that allows you to separate them according to certain criteria, which is the outcome of that survey. So it'll just keep getting split up, and it would create an environment or test environment that would uh, give you different results, or that is acceptable to whoever you're doing research for, or it fulfills your objective of research. So this is just the simple way of starting with the systematic sampling. One example I told you about, using median as a way of doing that selection. And then, when we get to the statistical methods, there would be things like deviation or standard deviation, which means that you, while you're creating your surveys for these employees, you have also, um, given it a reference to having a standard from which one answer would deviate from another, and from the results would be different from obtained from different employees. So that deviation from standard, that means standard is something that we will also discuss later, what could be the standard and what deviation means. Uh, anyway, this is systematic sampling. That's the bottom line. I don't see anything complicated here. Unless you have a question, I'd be happy to answer. If not, then just remember, systematic means there is a system to selecting by using some sort of analytical methods. That could be either statistical or non-statistical. If it is qualitative, cannot be it cannot be quantified, then there could be another method of analysis. But at the same time, the sampling method would be impacted, because now you're doing or collecting information which is different from or cannot be quantified. Like, for example, some employees, if you want to give or select employees that are voluntarily um, planning to move to a certain area or certain other offices based on convenience or whatever they might choose, you may want to use something as subtle as creating a questionnaire for them that says, how would you be happy if you were in this state? Uh, if and if you're going to be happier, then obviously you have to mark something. Uh, would you do it if you have to do it, or if it is mandatory, or if the company requires you to move, are you willing to relocate? Again, the question, how likely, how happy you would be, or would it be practically possible for you to move? So those questionnaires will give you a qualitative data. And based on how you're going to treat qualitative data for analysis, would also be one of the ways in which you can separate or distinguish groups, or create those or separate them into different stratas. Anyway, that's just giving you a practical way of how sometimes we use sampling and analytics together. Okay. Uh, but systematic sampling, you understand now. Then we have cluster sampling. Cluster sampling needs to be understood a little bit more intently. With how it is explained, may not be as easy to for you to interpret it. Let's suppose that this circle over here is an area or a geographic location of something. Okay, or it can be what you call the perimeter in terms of miles, where you could see that these could be these three factories or these three locations of a manufacturing plant. So one of the ways in which you're going to obtain a cluster sample is that, first of all, the cluster itself is made once you have selected these three locations to be within a certain geographic area. So this has become a cluster. Within this cluster, each of these buildings would require for you to select, let's say, from production department, 23 employees that are coming from a managerial positions. In the second one, which is doing the similar function, or it is the same manufacturing except that location is different. In this one, you have 27 employees to select from production department, but you are only selecting production workers. In this one, you've got supervisors and foremen. So you've got a cluster from where you have somewhat a synergy in terms of selecting that sample, because they belong to product development departments. The only thing that you would be able to differentiate or be selective about is different positions, supervisory position, managerial, production workers, so that the sample does not get diluted by just picking it up from one location or one place with where there could be a collusion between managerial position workers and production workers. Right now, we are not saying what is the objective of research, so we're just sort of saying that there could be synergies and dissimilarities based on the objective. If you want something non-biased to be obtained as a result of your sample research, you might want to select managerial position from one building and production workers from another and supervisors from a third location. So this could be what we call a cluster. You create a cluster where some of the attributes are typical or have some way of saying that it is standard, or it is another sample that you are obtaining from a typical or one department, but there is a rationale to how you would be selecting different positions. Like I said, sometimes there is a collusion, or the reports or the outcome of that is not as non-biased, So this is when you start to create clusters. We do a lot of sampling using clusters. If the assignment is big and the company is big, and it has different locations, that's what we do, is we separate each of these positions in different locations, but from a certain department. Okay. I hope this is clear. Then we have another type that we call multi-stage sampling. Multi-stage means that even though the sampling means that we are reducing the size of our size of the sample in few steps, or without having to reduce it enough where one sample may not be will require for you to extract more out of it, or more of a differentiator has to be uh, to be um, to be applied to further break that sample into smaller samples. So the process goes on. only because we start with a very high population with the objective or the final objective of the research demands that we do have to follow a system, but the way we are going to funnel it or bring it through filtration has to be followed to reduce it to a manageable size, yet maintain or extract from it certain characteristics or certain attributes which are going to give you, you know, a more compelling outcome of your research. So the best example in multi-stage sampling, first of all, in this diagram, you could see that there is stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, and stage 5. Okay, so this is multi-stage sampling. Now, if we have a population of US schools to work with to do our research, it will be almost impossible and it will take years probably. So what you do is that you are going to take population and use population as means of um, reducing the size, or in stage 1 you are even easier. Let's suppose that these smaller circles are different states. Okay, and in this states you have schools with certain population. In California, the population could be really high, the number of schools will be far too many. In smaller states it could be less and more manageable. So anyway, the first stage means that you're going to, from the population, extract your first sample, or you're going to call it stage 1 sample. So whatever criteria you make, either it is size based or it is, based on curriculum or based on the ratio of private school versus public schools, whatever the criteria might be, you're going to do your first selection. But idea of doing these multi-stage is really to bring it down um, to where the sample is going to fulfill the objective of your research. So it will definitely will have a flow from a larger area, which is stage 1. We are going to go to stage 2 to create another criteria to do more extraction or to ex- uh, to 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 um, to select few states with, let's say, a certain ratio of students, or between private and public schools there could be a selection of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you have, in stage 2 you have reduced it to some of these states that are apparently is showing what 3 into 5 states, okay, in stage 2. And by the way, even when you are doing going from one stage to another to the second one, you're not just randomizing, you're randomizing based on certain rational or certain criteria. So when you had from the population, that is from all the schools in stage 1 or from selected schools, you're going to do further selection based on that criteria. So you've reduced it now to 6 states. From 6 states, you're going to go from stage 2 to stage 3, where you have selected schools from these states. Now, these triangles are different schools, and each of these schools might represent, let's say, the red colored ones might represent certain attributes, like it could be affluent areas, or it could be, or the orange could be more, maybe some rural areas, or, um, areas, blue could be some other anyway. The idea is really with these is that now you are coming to the school level where you are selecting those schools. Now from these schools you're going to go to stage 4, um, and you are now ready to, from this you're going to start applying randomization. You could do stratified randomization, you could do multi what is that stratified, random, or whichever sampling method you want to use. Now you can apply it from these schools. Maybe these schools are also far too many, so you have, if you have to select students particularly, you will have to come up with some way of doing it. It could be, as we did, any kind of methods. There's no specific methods for me to tell you now, right now, but the idea is the randomization is multi-staged. So randomization could be any method that you follow in randomizing it, could be the criteria, it could be simple mathematical thing. Criteria in the sense that we are talking about now qualitative data, or anything that is representing something based on rationale of why you have selected it, so that you can justify that it was non-biased and it was methodical. So by the way, at the very end, we've made it simple. We're just saying that we are using simple random sampling, even though you could easily say that you have applied uh, clustered sampling or systematic sampling or stratified. It's your choice. But multi-stage is what is important. The other method is non-probability sampling. And by the way, there are more methods in probability sampling. Some of these methods are mathematically inclined, so you may want to learn about them. It's up to you. But the ones that we think that would give you an idea of how some of the in some of the ways you can use the method of sampling and what those are and the terminologies. These are important as an introduction. Then we have non-probability sampling techniques. One is what we call convenience-oriented sampling. Let me show you, because I don't have examples of these, and these are not as okay. Let me just open the book and see if we have any diagram. I would rather read it and explain it to you. Convenience sampling is statistical method of drawing representative data by selecting people because of the ease of volunteering, or setting units due to their availability or easy access. Now, this is proactive. Now, in the class, for example, you have 10 students, or let's say 50 students rather. And in that class, you could actually ask someone to, you can just randomly select like 10 students out of class of 50. There is no specific criteria to it. It's just not random, it's just selective. And mainly when people are willing to volunteer, or if your research is such that people, you know, and I don't mind saying this, a lot of times you have to actually give some incentive, like stay after class for 2 hours, 3 days a week, and we'd give you 2 days off, or would give you, a coupon, a voucher, or something. So that is convenience oriented sampling. Um, then we've got purposive selection. This purposive selection means that it's for certain attributes, certain criteria that you have to give to the individuals, and those individuals are known to you, but the purpose or objective of it is such that it requires for the subject to have certain characteristics, or a certain type of criteria of selecting them based on perhaps their ideas, or their performance. Anything can be a criteria, but it is purposive, means that it is proactively selected based on those characteristics. Quota based sampling is when example represents specific characters of a population chosen by researcher. Now, quota is something that we don't use anymore. We use convenience and purposive. Quota based is same as the purposive sampling. However, what quota used to be is that in clinical research, for instance, you would select from um, from the population a sample which fulfills a certain um, I keep repeating the word, just beating the same word characteristic, but what can I do? That's the only word. Certain characteristics or certain type of, let's say, ailments or certain symptoms, but you have to select them because they're not easy to find otherwise. So you have to actually go and make that selection. That is quota based. And the quota also means that you have to select five, let's say, or 10 to make that sample large enough or enough that could uh, give us give a proper results from whatever you gather out of that sample, and the results would be based on your own selection of people. In snowballing sampling, there is a situation where it is very hard to find people for your sample. So you actually end up hiring those recruiters to gather that sample for you. Um, Snowballing means that one of the ways that you can think of as an example is where one person knows another person, another person knows another person within a group that is easy for that person to reach to, where you don't have access. Like, what are those groups called? Like alcohol anonymous groups, where you have groups for alcoholics. In rehabilitation centers, one person can have other colleagues that can participate in that. So you ask this person to find another person where you're not directly recruiting them, but you have created a snowballing effect by asking someone to find others, where others can find two more. And so they start to build that sample size for you. Um, Now, volunteered sampling is where you have offered something in return for people to volunteer on their own. So there is an incentive for someone to participate in that group or that sample. But down the negative side of it is that some people are habitual participants in drug trials because they get paid. Some people are volunteers because they keep an eye on that opportunity as having, as being more regularly available, and it sort of dilutes the objective of having these participants to be, volunteering all the time. So you have to be watchful about it. So that's where volunteering sampling has a little bit of a drawback. But volunteering definitely means people who actually can participate on account of their knowledge of knowing that somebody is recruiting the sample for such and such reasons and for some many incentive. That's volunteering sample. But all four or five of these that we talked about are non-probability, meaning that even though there is somewhat a little bit of an organization to gathering those samples, but at the same time there is a bias of sorts mixed with you know, recruiters' ability to find the right people by actually being proactively selecting that group. So, especially difficult situations where it's hard to get the participants uh, to part, especially in new drug trials. Yeah? That's a good example. People are a little bit reluctant, hard to find the right people. That kind of thing. Anyway, so that's probability sampling and the non-probability sampling, which we have covered. So, Isha, do you do any kind of research work in the library for your, let's say, or even for Kristen to ask the same question? Because in educational institutions, specifically where the research is going on, they might ask librarians to help them recruit for the sample that they might need uh, for whatever reason. It could be for surveys, it could be for physically participating students in that group, could be social experiment volunteering. I'm not sure if you have ever worked with sampling or obtained any sample sizes.
Mr.
Isha?
Naveed, to answer this question, yeah, for my research, for my personal research, yes, I do collect qualitative, quantitative data. And as you said that, yes, physical appearance do matter in case of qualitative data. And quantitative is mainly done through surveys and all. But for my professional attributes, I have not really done so much in that field because from last 3 years I was working in a school. So research is totally a different level in schools here in Middle East. So we
Hmm.
still in developing stage, I would rather call it, because students are not very much familiar with different types of strategies that we use for research.
Recruitment research. Okay.
Yes,
Got it.
yes.
Thank you. Kristen, how about you? Any experience with working with, let's say, students that are writing thesis or research papers that would ask you assistance in obtaining some samples or individuals to participate in study of sorts?
Usually, I would always, if I am asked, it would be, how do I find participants for for their specific dissertation research? And I always end up doing the snowballing sampling. I give them suggestions of where to go for them to get participants if they don't have enough. So I just point them in the right direction for, have you thought of this? Have you looked here? Have you checked all of these other places that is population specific to what they're doing?
One of the things I feel that the librarians should be able to assist with, and not many universities have that interaction between the academics, professors, researchers, um, and and PhD students, is that they don't interact enough with the librarians, and librarians are the first stop for them to actually ask for assistance in this area of sampling or looking for or gathering these samples for them. It is one of those things that is not there in uh, for the librarians to participate in, even though it can get really complex, and it can actually be one of those things which is not only time consuming, but like I mentioned to you, there is a method to it, and there is a lot of vetting involved, and it sort of makes the librarian job slightly more interesting. So I think one should look at this as a service from the libraries. And this is where we find that we get a lot of opportunities, mostly from private sectors, asking us to do the recruitment for their sample needs. And we do that. And sometimes it takes us months to do that find those specific type of sample sizes. Okay, now we are getting into data analytics, but let me go back to my slide so I can keep focus on where I am. It gives me my bearings exactly. So next is data analytics or data analysis. Uh, But before I do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about surveys and then go to the analytics part. Let us just take a short break right now. Make yourselves a cup of coffee, take a break, and I'll see you in about 10-15 minutes. I am assuming, based on whatever is left over, and we need to finish up this module 2 is still on module 2. So it might be about 10-15-20 minutes over the time. For that, I, don't expect you to be, all of you be available. So make it convenient for yourself. If you can provision for a little bit of extra time, that would be wonderful. If not, it's still okay. So I'm now going to shut the mic and the camera for a little bit, and I'll see you after the break. Everyone, let's continue. If you're there, you can see my screen, you can hear my voice. You can just give me a nod, put it in the chat, and we'll start with surveys and polls. Thank you. All good to go. Thank you. Going to show you a chart here. It's going to talk about different types of questions that you put in a survey. That's what we'll be looking at, 2 types of questions. Now, surveys and polls are different. And I showed you before a chart, which is a very easy way for you to look at the differentiation between the two. Most important for us is survey questionnaires. These questionnaires are very complicated sometimes to create. They need an approval from the client. You have to be experienced enough to create those surveys, because there is ways of asking questions which could be of sensitive nature, others that are difficult to answer, some questions that could be leading questions, but they don't give a complete answer directly, but you have to collect from those responses an idea or get a general sense of what the answers would mean. So surveys have a technicality that needs to be learned, and generally we would like to divide these survey questions into 2 types. One we call close-ended, the other one is open-ended. Open-ended means that this is the type of questions for which you don't actually want definitive answers, and it is not the answers that would give a choice which is predetermined choices, as in multiple choice questions, but rather it is an expression of somebody's idea or opinions for which they're free to write something in a descriptive manner, and those are open-ended questions. Then we have close-ended questions, which has a design or a way or a structure that is given a certain term to identify with. And close-ended means that the choice one has to answer within the confines of a choice given for answering these questions. So these are close-ended questions that would be labeled as mentioned here. There is all these different ones. You just have to see what it means or how they're structured to be able to answer questions in the exams. So the terms might be important. Dichotomous, Likert scale, semantic differential, rating. It sounds complicated, but when you look at the examples, you know that they're not very complicated, except that the terminology needs to indicate the structure of it or how they're set, depending on how you would like them to be answered. And these close-ended questions can be qualitative, have a data or the choice of answers that could be quantitative in nature or could be qualitative. So both, but mostly in qualitative type of questionnaires, we use um, these type of structures. Let's just look at them as examples in the book because we don't have it in the slides. And even before I do that, we would look at longitude. There are two types of surveys. Like generally, the survey types, in the sense of what the objective of your survey is, it can be either longitudinal or cross-sectional. And anyway, these are, different ways in which we collect these surveys, or where we can actually use these terms like focus groups, social experiments, clinical trials, etc. We already have learned how these collection methods work. So if it is web related, these are the terms we use: focus groups, and there could be a few more that I don't see here. But it's not as important as understanding the types or the objective being longitudinal or cross-sectional. So let's get to the book first and look at these two types. And this is the chart I was telling you about, the differentiation between surveys and polls. It's on page 358. It is longitude. Okay. Here it is. I'm going to use it. So what is a cross-sectional survey? Now, in cross-sectional surveys, you don't have to worry about the timing. Certain surveys require to get answers immediately, right away, without having to worry about what the situation might evolve later for some of the answers to be changed later on, or some of the questions rather be changed later on. In cross-sectional surveys, we have one questionnaire that would ask something that can be answered right away. And I'll tell you what cannot be answered right away, but cross-sectional surveys is, that we know of, like we can get the answers right away from. An example of this is about the relationship between peer pressure and cigarette smoking amongst teenagers. Another can be, for example, a student perception following the completion of the first academic year, student behavior following a promotional campaign, students' understanding of learning outcome following an activity. So, what is described here as something which needs to be answered later on after an event, when circumstances changes or the eventuality of that changes with time, that's not cross-sectional, that is longitudinal. And I'll show you that what is asking questions and getting answers from right away is cross-sectional, and what is going to be time sensitive. And I don't know why it's been described it in this para, but the last three lines, this one is talking about longitudinal survey. When a researcher attempts to gather information over time or from one point up to another, he is doing longitudinal surveys. Example is another, for example, a student perception following completion of the first academic year. They were smokers. Then in the next in the next survey questionnaire, you're still following that same individual or the subject, and the subject of interview would be willing to participate in returning questionnaires which are followed with the time as things progress or as they change. So those are longitudinal surveys. Cross-sectional is answering right away. That's the only difference. Okay. Now I'm going to come back to the types. Let's look at, I guess we'll start with dichotomous. Dichotomous means that a survey questionnaire that is to be answered either as yes or no. Dicho means two. Dichotomous means two values. So it could be yes or no, could be good or bad. Those are dichotomous and it's easy. And you notice that there is these numbers placed. It could be of higher significance if you are trying to make it into quantitative data. Because one can mean yes, two could mean no, and you can actually plug these figures into some sort of analytical calculations. So what are the number of times one has occurred from X number of students versus where two has occurred from the same sample of X? Uh, yes can be 10 times, no can be 2 times. And so it can be quantified in that sense. But dichotomous means just two values. Then we've got multiple choice, which we are familiar with. In preparing copy for a printer, which methods of attaching printed pages to backing sheet is preferred? Stapling, taping, gluing, So these are multiple choice. But when you give multiple choice, the nature of the answers or whatever the choices are have to have some relationship with each other so that it would make sense for the selection to have a meaning under the same objective of the question. So multiple choices is another one. Then we've got rating question. Rating is more of the qualitative nature. As you can observe, rating very frequently, almost daily, frequently twice a week, occasionally once a week. So all these are rating questions, like you are basically also rating something which is more on the descriptive, or it could even be personal preferences or opinions that are not exactly answered in numbers. So these are rating questions. Likert scale, you don't give a lot of choices, but somewhat where the question is of the nature where people might have no opinion or be neutral about something or some idea. You would use a Likert scale where you give one option that is not definitive, or it could be neutral or not exactly answered, but still it is a value for you to obtain that expression or that idea, that opinion. So when you have agree and disagree, these two could be dichotomous, but when you add something in the middle, which is a neutral idea, you would call it a Likert scale question. And another thing about Likert scale, which is a really good way of designing your questionnaire, because it has a structure that leads someone to answer questions, even if they have answered it in a way that is not giving a definitive idea, like somewhat agree. You can lead them into a second type of question, which would open up more for them to give even a better way of expressing it in a more granular way. So overall, do you think trade globalization is good for? Disagree somewhat or agree? You consumer like you, so there could be subset of those questions. Consumer like you, companies in your country creating jobs, and you could give them more of an option to further enforce what they have selected earlier. So they might change the entire thing, or it might change the entire perspective that you have obtained from the results. Like whoever was doing somewhat now are, selecting, other choices like disagree or agree on this. So you have further opened it up by itemizing those or breaking that answer into more ideas for them to get a better choice. That is Likert scale, and it is very commonly used. Semantic differential scale, which means that where the three ideas or where the question required for someone to express in a more detailed way their choices given a scale or given a larger choices, as in bad, it could be how bad. If the selection is bad, then how bad is it, from a scale of 1 to 7, for instance. um, could it be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? This is for more difficult questions and questions which are more personal or has an element of choices that cannot be definitely be considered in terms of numbers, cannot be considered as having a definitive value for the results. Why I'm saying that is because for the user, bad between 2 and 3, they won't be able to figure it out exactly, because it's not saying bad is number 3 or 2 or how bad it is. I mean, exactly, they cannot pinpoint, and even you don't want to confine them to a value which would say that 4 is not bad, not good. So what is to say that 4 is neutral, or it is not too good or not too bad? So it is more difficult to interpret, but this is for more sensitive questions or questions for which people have very strong opinions. And so if they choose unimportant, then how unimportant it is or how important it is. And this is semantic differential. Differential means anything that is more given a choice after a selection of either being, bad or unimportant or good or acceptable. Instead of writing it down like that, certain answers would require opinions, especially when they're not able to get definitive opinion and more of neutral opinions are coming. Then maybe this is another way that would give another chance for the researcher to get somewhat better answers for those questions. These are semantic differential. Differential is, uh, you know, is explained better when you look at the chart of how they are set. Ranking questions. Ranking means that you have a choice as first, second, or third choice. Means that you're not saying that you don't have an answer for something, or you are placing your subject of subject in the survey to have to answer within the choices that definitely would require a number to be put into it. Um, Perhaps their choice could be they don't want to go anywhere out of these, let's say, 5 different locations, so there are 5 different cities to make it a choice. So that wouldn't be something that they will have the opportunity to not put anything in them. So these are called ranking questions. So it has to be ranked like first choice, second choice, third choice, and so on. Then we've got a checklist. Checklist type could be, checklist usually are not given a choice to answer one question or to select one of the choices. You can select more than one. Checklist usually means one to, there could be like out of this, you have, let's say, 6 choices. One can mark all 6 of them, or you can mark, second and fourth. Whatever, it doesn't have to be just one choice. This is the differentiator between a checklist and other type of questions. Okay. Uh, just remember it, because if you don't have to read them again, just by learning from what I'm teaching you right now, you can put this idea. It's not difficult to contain, and you don't have to go through it again. You could just answer it if it comes in the question. Like they might say, if you have to select or given if you have to make a selection from multiple choice question with more than one answers, what type of questionnaire is that? Then there is a drop box giving a list: Likert scale, semantic differential, checklist, and you will mark checklist or make that selection. So that's the idea. Okay. Um, that's the some of the type of questions that are there in the survey. And there are techniques to how you're going to phrase the questions. Certain methods to asking questions in interviews. For instance, in interviews you're writing notes, but eventually those notes have to be um, translated into something which could be in the format of a questionnaire, or it could be something that answers questions that you may have in mind for it to have a meaning for that specific research. You still have to bring it back and then format it and organize it and put your impression of those answers in any of these formats if you'd like. um, there is another concept which is something to do with how you would actually capture some of the interviews, or it could be virtual focus groups, even videos, as in social experiments. It could be any of those methods that are used for collection of data, except that when you collect that either through surveys or through other ways, it would have a meaning, or it would have to have some way of mentioning the method of how you're organizing that information after you've collected it. One of the methods is called coding, the other one is called memoing, and then there are diagrams or entity relationship diagrams, brainstorming diagrams, could be freehand diagrams. That would be another way. So what is coding? Coding is a way of tagging or identifying certain ideas or certain text or expression of that idea that is given a code. So you don't have to write long um, or repeat some ideas over and over in your writing of how you are going to explain it when you've collected that or while you're collecting that information. So coding is just one of those, like, idea about where somebody is planning to move in winter, mostly from New York. What is their preferences? So New York could be the word moving from. So instead of writing the entire question, you're going to quote them. So how many in New York? You're going to write New York, and in your observation, whatever you have written in freehand or anything that you have written as a description or as a memo or memoing format, you can convert that into coding, so that idea or those words or frequency of those words you have used in that description would be something that you can relate to or connect with or get the entire picture of what it is about. So that's why coding means just expressing it in the smallest way possible, so that the larger idea or the bigger picture around it can be connected. That's coding. Memoing is freehand writing, an idea that you express in your diary, especially watching observations, as we did when we talking about information collection method. Observation could be one idea that needs to be to be memoed, or it needs to, and while you're doing memoing, there is there is a certain rules to being accepted, because anything that you write um, as collection of information has to have a structure that would be acceptable or that would be considered authentic. Like time and date is absolutely important. Participants or the scenario or the situation is very important. Then there is a more important is using these memoing techniques in a situation which will not allow you to create detailed surveys. For example, there is a research method we call grounded theory or ethnography. Both ethnography and grounded theory is a theory, while ethnography is a process inside of grounded theory. What grounded theory means, that you start with an idea of something for which you need to be part of that situation or that scenario or that environment where you are actually embedded in, or you are collecting information from the base idea about something. For instance, if it is a cultural thing and you're doing social experiments, so you have to probably be with them, live with them, or experience it yourself to see if your basic idea can expand further, because now your collection of information is changing, or the mode or the specification or the theory part which you brought with you is now evolving, and that idea is changing. So you are creating more questions out of that base question to be answered as the way of moving in the direction which keeps changing. And this process in itself is called ethnography. So when ethnography is involved, you do a lot of memoing. Sometimes you do coding, sometimes you do memoing, but you do it in a way that it is actually originally written by you in your handwriting, date and time, location, environment that you have to describe, ideas, talks, interviews, everything can be memoed. And because sometimes the memoing is too large and it's just freehand, then you would like to do coding out of it, so that the main text or some of the ways in which you can collect typically answered, or those ideas as frequented, less frequented, more to elaborate on, or less, or ideas that needs to be ignored, or the theory needs to be changed. You're going to code it. You're going to make it more concise by there is if you write research coding or coding in research and Google it, you would find there are a lot of videos made on it. And it is everybody is giving different methods in that. But the main idea you will get if you want to actually use coding somewhere later on. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but if not, then more can be learned. But I guess we did cover quite a bit on the surveys and polls. Now we have to look at the last leg of research methods that has to do with analytics, I would be using the book again and show you quantitative research method, which is going to talk about by the way, before we get to quantitative analysis, two things that I don't want to miss on. And let me also cross check here in the slide if it is mentioned. If it is mentioned, we're going to talk about it. There is analytic induction and grounded theory. And here we have discussed coding, memoing. Okay. So in the qualitative data analysis, two things, analytic induction and grounded theory. Okay. Analytic induction basically means that you are using your own critical thinking, your own skills as a researcher to be able to understand a phenomena or certain events that would give answers to social questions, race, religion, these subjects, social setup, poverty, environment, things like that. But it is based on observations. A lot of times it is not the quantitative data that you can collect, but rather the ideas that can be converted or that can be translated into something more meaningful, either through quantifying it or building a relationship or building something that says frequency of such and such thing happening so many times. So that is analytic induction. It's sometimes considered biased, depending on, if you have you have a very strong ideas about something or someone. So this is the only drawback. Otherwise, it is generally analytic induction means that you are bringing your own opinion, your own viewpoint. It's induction, analytic induction. Grounded theory, like I said, has got a process attached to it that's called ethnography. But grounded theory generally means if your way of collecting qualitative data requires for you to start with a generative question or something that you can build more on that question as specific to a certain event or certain situations, which would require for you to be very open-minded and also not, um, you know, uh, have a very strong ideas about something, but rather with an open mind to see where things take you. Um, and based on as you learn, you're going to, use your first question or first idea as a starter. And if you're going to apply a grounded theory, you might end up with getting to a different set of problems or be able to solve something which eventually would show up after you've over a period of time you're doing research, and therefore it keeps changing. So that is grounded theory. Okay. In both situations you are going to be collecting or you're using a method called coding memoing. This is mostly used for qualitative research work when you have to capture something. Integrative diagrams, like I said, brainstorming, entity relationship, impact relationship, uh, price versus, consumer, consumer interest versus seasonal things. everything that you can express in a diagram. That's what integrative diagrams means. So anyway, in quantitative data on the analytics side, we are looking at statistical methods. And before I start with statistical methods, some of you might be uncomfortable thinking that you'll have to do calculations or you have to actually learn statistics from this, or you're revisiting statistics. It's none of that, especially based on what is required by the examiner in CIRS. They don't want you to compute anything. They don't want you to validate any figures or something that would involve a question that demands that you do all the calculations to come up with some of the things that we talk about, like mean, mode, median, or you have to look at the or you have to create any graphs or charts. None of that is going to be part of the exam, and it's not expected that you learn statistics. The idea here is to convey to you that one of the most useful methods could be statistical methods in quantitative analysis. And especially when you're doing sampling or sample size are to be obtained, you may be in a position to apply some of these statistical ways of calculating the non-biased way, probability or probabilistic samples. Second is that you understand that if something is expressed as charts or as graphs or as a data visualization that you're looking at or you're supposed to build, then you at least get introduced to or have a sense that these could be typically something that you may want to learn later as you know as one of the important uh, uh, expression or illustrations that you may have to uh, uh, to build um, for compelling reporting. Okay, for something that is easy um, for your client to look at and get the idea. Graphs and illustrations, as I'm going to mention right now, are only meant to be placed in the research results. But I don't know if I told you, but mostly we do our statistical computation or graphs or anything that would require mathematical computation. We'll just plug it into specialized softwares. That's only job is to create everything that you're looking at right now, or do all the computations and give the visuals in terms of charts or 3D diagrams or 3D dimensions of visualizing data. All of that is automated right now. So you don't have to actually do any of those maths. I mean, it's not something that I had to explain in detail. So I'm just going to give you an idea. One of the things in statistical methods is that we understand what is mean, mode, and median. Mean means average of numbers. Certain numbers we can make an average out of by, if they're like, let's say, average of some different numbering as an outcome of results that needs to be averaged out, which means all of these measures of the results can be put together, added together, and divided by number of those individual numbers. So if 6, 4, 5, 4, 8 plus 3, this is average, like, add all of these divided by number of these numbers. So you get the average figure of 5. Okay, so that's very simple, but certain numbers you cannot average out. Like, I think, was it nominal data? In that, you cannot divide children as 1.5 or 1.2, so you cannot average them. If anything that needs to be averaged out, it has to have some of, so some rationale to applying these methods. Uh, and there could be many examples. I can't think of a lot more examples, just so that this is averaging. It is very simple maths. Then we have, even in sample sizes, some numbers we cannot average. Like employee numbers, we cannot give it an average, okay, because they're unique to that employee. But if they're employees numbers, then we can use another method. It's called median. Median, for instance, and I can't say exactly if it has to do with individuals, but let's just look at numbers so we don't confuse it. But ideally, if it was, the every 10th, for instance, where we did a list of employees and we said that the sample would mean every 6th or 10th employee, starting from number 6, if you recall, those could be median, okay? Or those cannot be averaged out. Uh, so in this one, what median means, that if you have numbers, especially if you have duplication of numbers, and it could mean anything. 55 could be allocated to the strength of something or weakness of something, or a number or a weightage given. So if you have numbers like 65, 55, 89, whatever these mean, we are not interested in, but assuming that these are the numbers that are randomly there and it relates to something, but it has, why is this 55 duplicated here? Don't understand. Okay, so this is showing the random numbers, and what we have at the bottom is telling you how the median would be calculated. So let's suppose median means that we have to give some organization to those numbers, random, however random they may be. So one method would be to just put the lowest number and sort of put other numbers right next to it until you reach the highest number, which is 92. And incidentally, if there are two indicators of the same number, then again you may end up in some sort of a problem. So you would have to come up with a median, which means that the sixth number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sixth number would be considered median, even though another instance of 56 is here. But here 56 would mean something different from what 56, the second occurrence of 56 would mean. So this could cause confusion and could be a problem. So the best method would be to use median, where you give some organization to how the numbers are sequential, not sequential, but rather from smallest to the largest numbers are laid. And then you're going to select the sixth one, which is 56, which is this 56. And in effect, the other 56 might be slightly different. So this is median, or in simpler terms, without worrying about the duplicates, just think of it as the number which is given a certain interval between the number where you're starting from and the choice of number, which is constantly or consistently going to extract that as an indicator or a sample selection. By giving it a number of records after, let's say, every sixth record. So you'll continue another sixth record and seventh record. You'll just keep continuing with that. That's median. So you definitely, when you are doing your sampling and you have to describe a method, you have to indicate if it is median you're using or average you're using, whatever you're using, you have to describe a known or a well-known method that is understood. Mode is another relationship. Mode basically means that the highest point or highest delta of something, or it could be the highest point or the highest number in sequence of numbers. So whatever is the highest could be a mode. Or mode can also be where sometimes the mean or the I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize. The one that we were doing before, this is median. Okay. So median, sometimes it's very rare when median, mode, and mean cross each other at the highest delta, as in the middle, you could see. This could be the optimum or the optimized number, or it could be anything that is crossing the path in a graph, or rather all numbers that together would become a union of something which is representing a strong or giving it a strength of number that might be a selection in certain situations. But generally, it never happens. It's hardly happening. Only in certain circumstances it does happen. But it has more to do with scientific things rather than when the real sampling happens, you would be looking at mean, mode, and median to have a different delta or different ways or points where x and y axis are coming together. So a mean mode would mean the highest point here. Mean could be the average over here. Median could be over here. So basically, the distance or the differential between mean, median, and mode is seldom coming together. And then there is a parabola, we call it parabola. I'm sorry, which is where the numbers are basically slanting towards skewing, or the parabola is moving either on the right side or on the left side. So we don't have to worry about right skew and left skew. All we have to know is that there is mean, mode, and median, and these three needs to be understood enough that if it comes in the exam to where numbers or the chart is mentioned, you would know what it means. So if this median as a word is missing, and you only see in the exam this chart with mode and mean mentioned, and nothing in between is mentioned, where this line is actually indicating the chart that you have viewed before, but without the word median in it, then you would just insert the word median. So it has more to do with your visuals of understanding how these charts are set in the book. The examiner just wants to know that you understand the chart um, as a representation of something for which you will be given choice of answers. So mean, mode, and median, these three things you have to remember, and just look at the chart, nothing complicated about it. Hardly you would see these charts, but what is perhaps more frequented is this kind of illustration. It would ask that what the highlighted number means. Would it be mean, mode, or median? You would just select median. Average, this question would be simple to answer. It's just, the computation, you can see what it's bringing, and it is just averaging out numbers. This is what mean is. Then there is another chart which is showing dispersion. Basically, dispersion is the thickness or concentration or the width or the area covered, that is giving a visual indication of how the data is concentrated or expanded or dispersed. So the density of that data would be an indicator of occurrences of those numbers in a physical area, which visually you can look at, and at the same time, in the chart with x and y axis, it is giving on one of the axis as figures or numbers, which represents, say, x or something to do with what is considered as one of the measurements or one of the values that are expressed um, or that are given in text as having, a meaning. Like in this one, you've got number of groups on the x-axis. It is saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It is representing 8 groups. And against 8 groups, I guess this is X, I'm sorry, this is Y. So Y is giving groups that are numbered 1 through 8. And on the X-axis, you could see the size of the tutorial group. Like each of these groups may have so many students, or the spread of what comes as points or cross points between number of groups in certain semester, with having in each of these blocks a concentration of number of students mentioned in the x-axis, is building a chart, or it is indicating the concentration, or the giving the numbers versus groups in certain semester. So number of groups in one semester is shown here as having the highest number of groups attending semester 1, which is in this block. And visually, it is giving an idea that in one semester, at a glance, you could see in semester 1, the tutorial group number 5 had maximum number of students, okay, in that group. When you compare it with the chart 2, you could see in the same sort of size of the tutorial group of 5 students in the middle one, with the number of groups being only 4. So even though the number of students in this group were far less compared to semester 1, but on account of visuals of dispersion of how the concentration based on the blocks that you're looking at are spread, or having more students registered across with more of the student groups compared to semester 1, you can get an idea of what was the attendance like, or what was the I guess the seasonal um, uh, response in semester 2 of number of groups registering with number of students, which may not be. And again, I'm looking at number 5. So dispersion is that in the 5th one, the group had only 4 students compared to semester 1, yet on account of how it is spread, the concentration of it would give you an idea that more of the students are registered in semester 2 versus semester 1, even though there was a spike of size of student in one of the groups with the number of students. So it is a dispersion which is taking 0 as a reference, where the x and y is crossing at the 0 point you're looking at right now. And from 0, you could see that it has spread as dispersion, or as something which is visually easy to interpret. Same way, visualization or data visualization is used in sort of data analytics, where you have a lot of numbers and a lot of elements, or a lot of variables, but very hard to describe in a 3D way. And it is also very difficult to bring it into charts. So what they do is they create dispersion maps, which would say that concentration of so many points that are collected or visually visible, where one point could mean 1,000 units. The second dot could mean 10,000, 100,000 units. So they basically are concentrated to give you a picture, or a concentration of all those dots at a certain X and Y axis with a point where you can measure the frequency or the occurrences of something visually as having more of the dots concentrated within a certain perimeter. So again, I'm also doing visualization, just explaining it without giving a picture. But because dispersion is explained here in the simplest way, the chart would mean that in the exam, they would ask, what does it represent? Is it dispersion, variance? What is it that it is talking about? But because you've seen this chart under the heading of measurability, variability, deviation, you would know that that's deviation or variation or something which is indicating the dispersion. Now, if you don't see the word dispersion here, and you see that it is talking about measure of variability, measure of variability is more generic. The diagram is dispersion diagram. The variability is just saying that anything in comparison to differential of time, or where one chart needs to be compared with another chart in terms of interval of a period of time, and it can be measured against another chart based on where you started from as the standard period, or the deviation could mean that one chart is the standard for one semester, where the deviation again is showing in the second semester. Similarly, a deviation can be a 0 point, and anything that moves from left 0 point to the right and up in the chart, that could be a deviation. In that case, the standard would be 0. So where the standard is not 0, or this is not the 0 point is not the consideration as standard, we look at other type of deviation, which is shown in this chart. Take an example of what one of these bars represent, or the one that I'm looking at, maybe the mean or the mean unit, which is the average part, is shown here on X and Y axis, represented with a block all the way down here. So if this is the standard, and anything that now we are no longer talking about 0 point here, this has become a standard. And from this standard, we are going to look at the variability or variance as having a distance away from the mean block. So anything that is going on the right as other blocks would be measured against the average block as a percentage of deviation from this block to the one that is next to it, and keep going on the x-axis, and you can see the deviation changing with the distance. It could even be a block that goes up, or it could be a block that goes down. It is never a parabola. Usually it's like a wave or some sort of a graph that says the deviation from standard. But standard is what you're going to measure as 0 point. That's what I'm saying. So anything that moves from 0 point away on the right hand side or on the left hand means negative, or it is depreciated or gone down, or it has lost value, but it is going left as a minus value, on the right is a plus value. So there is a positive deviation on the right hand side represented by each of these blocks and indicated by these numbers, the plus 150, 250. So the question is that what does this chart represent? You would say it represents standard deviation. Okay. That's all they're going to ask in the exam. So even before I started with this topic, I did want you to worry about exam or computation, is because sometimes you feel like, there's a lot more that you have to learn, uh, and more details that you would have to read through in the book, but not so. Charts, idea, terminologies, three things. Okay. Nothing else is important. Now, in the chapter 25, we have information reliability and associated risks. It is just a matter of reading through this. It is plain English, and it is some of the common sense information on the descriptive side. So not anything that we have to explain much as part of the program. We leave it for you to read through. And besides and beyond this, the what we call the module 2, online search and research methods, that is completed finally. And as you can guess, the module 2 is a long one, and it covers around, I'd say, about 70% of the course. So we have to now move on to module 3, which is business of research and research in business. And I don't know if you looked up or you remember, we did do specimen of research request for request research request proposal and response to research request. So that was part of the module 3. We've done that, and luckily we did that, so less of a burden on me to go through it again. However, we have to now start with research and business of research. Between three of you, tell me if any one of you are planning to start your own research business or do some consulting as an independent researcher. Any plans to do that or go on your own with
Maybe,
just so that I know if it is useful or for you or not. Who
maybe,
is?
Alicia.
Listy, yeah.
I am
Yes,
too.
and it's Kristen, eh?
Yes.
So then we can actually make it worthwhile for you to go through this one. We have to do it, and luckily we were able to finish everything in time. So we're done with the module 2 totally. Now I'm going to start with module 3, research in business and business of research. I'll just give you an overview of what it covers. And then in the next class, day after, we'll start with this fresh. Research is an opportunity if you want to engage as a consultant. But a lot of times there is opportunity lost because you don't know venues of opportunities. One of the opportunities that we would talk about in this module 3 is for looking for outsourced research for businesses and corporations, even big companies that actually are interested in hiring outside consultants to do it for them for various reasons. One of the reason is that sometimes it is the stakeholders, directors, financial institutions, they need third party to do some sort of validation of something. It could be share valuation, which is, again, I'm not saying that whether you're qualified to do it or not, but let's suppose that is one opportunity as an example. Other is market research, market intelligence. It's hard for them to gather that data, directly. If they go to the competitor or try to find it themselves, might not be possible. So they're going to engage you. Certain management reports which are internally used, yet they have an element of obtaining or looking for data that is only available from outside, as with from the competitors, industry related data. They may not have the resource or have the ability to gather that. Then they would engage outside help to know what part of management reporting or internal reports or operational management data that they require would in those report would require outside help. This is one information that is not usually understood well or is taken as an opportunity or is not proactively pursued by researchers or research analysts that are independently engaged in their own business. So the outsourced opportunity is going to have a relationship with what is required or generally is is a combination of internal reports or internal data along with the data that is they're seeking from the outside or outsource researchers. So if you can connect that or understand all that is to be understood in terms of what those managerial or management reporting or even shareholders or banking needs reporting are mm, are of value to to look for those individual requirements of outside obtained information sets. That's why we need to make a connection between the type of reports and how you can engage. Certain reports might interest you because you have technology background and you can obtain certain technical information. Other managerial reports would require for you to have accounting backgrounds. Some may require marketing background. Others might just be uh, sales leads or collection of potential clients or outlook for the market. Even social media, if you are specializing in social media data collection, you may want to deal with the or contribute to the market research or marketing reporting, which are otherwise used internally by the management, but at the same time would involve or require for outside help to pitch in a little bit. So all those connections are what is going to talk about research in business. This part where we're just exclusively looking at these three words, research and business, so that you have that awareness. Then you've got business of online research, things that and by the way, there is outside opportunities also, which is not dependent on the enterprise or businesses, but rather something for which you would go all out as offering your research services, either as an independent contractor or as a subcontractor to other research companies. And that would mean you would be have to be well prepared to look at some of the basic requirements of what you need to be equipped with. Besides just having the search skills, using the internet, there are other things like, the market pricing or the pricing methods, how you're going to bill the client, what could be those methods, which are industry-wide acceptable methods. What could be ways in which you're going to calculate the cost or the minimum cost of offering your hourly rates? How would you calculate that? Then we'll talk about opportunities like I mentioned, I guess, working with subcontractors or where you would go to online portals. Some of the companies or the typical companies that are hiring, research analysts or researchers, for different those different areas will be talked about. Like we'll talk about specific portals that connect consultants with potential clients. Then there would be, opportunities like delivering answers, collecting research reports, mostly just specific type of data that you can hunt for, look for, and you can do it with much ease and at less time. So it is outsourced to you just because you have that specialization. There could be 10 different things. So we look at all of them individually. So those are the opportunities. Differentiation between, being focused as a specialist in certain area of knowledge to exclusively be offering your service packages to that industry, versus working as a generalist, where your only technical skills, irrespective of what your background is, but your skills of finding something, look for something, analyze something is 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 um, is available or is what is offered, then of course you become a generalist, and that could be another sort of opportunities that would be linking as a you can link with as a generalist. So what are those opportunities? And we are exclusively now talking about area that is specific to the online available jobs or telecommuting jobs. So these are the dots that we will try to cover. We don't have a huge or a lot of time, fortunately, but the main idea we'll be able to cover. At the same time, I'm not going to miss out on things that would show up in the exam. And when I say things that show up, means that I'm not a guarantor of what is going to come in the exam, so don't take me wrong. But whatever is mentioned in the slides or is contained in the PowerPoints is assumed to be something which necessarily have to be taught as essentials for passing the CIRS exam. So that is my basis. So I'll make sure that that part is covered. You have not seen the sample exams or the final exams yet. So I'm afraid that we'll have to organize it and ask you for an additional amount of time. And this time in your batch, we have actually asked too much of you with adding few more classes. So as it is a burden, but at the same time, if it is essential and if it is something that I can even deliver as a recorded bit of information from before, I would do that. But you have to provision for Monday an additional class. I'm repeating it again, which is going to be on the 20th, Monday of the next week. And we were supposed to finish the entire course by 17th or by this Friday. So whatever comes, as long as you are with me and you are okay with letting me complete everything for you, that will be really wonderful and I'll be grateful. So for now, let's just call it end of the class. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And if not, then I'll see you the next class.
Thank you, Mr. Navid. Bye-bye, everyone.
Much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All on
Bye-bye.
Wednesday.
Thank you. All the best. See you then. Bye-bye.